Good afternoon. I will try that again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Derbycon. So, my name is Mano Paul. I'll introduce myself in a minute over here. And before I do that, everybody who is here is probably here for the talk, Hackers versus Defenders. Can the defender ever, stop playing catch-up and win? We'll kind of try to see if we can really answer that question. But before we do that, before I get into the topic itself, everyone who is excited to be here at Derbycon, shout out at the count of 3, and I'm going to give the count 3, 2, 1, and you're going to shout out, "We love Derbycon." We've got to be like the loudest over here. There's a competition that's going on as to who's the loudest, right? And so we're going to shout as loud as we can. So everybody got the rules, and so let's go. 3, 2, 1. We love Derbycon! Awesome. Who am I? My name is Mano Paul. It actually comes from Mano Paul. I kind of introduced myself, and I usually abbreviate it to Mano Paul because there was a colleague of mine who used to think that I was actually spelled, the way they would pronounce my name was spelled Marijuana Paul. All right? And so it's Manoranjan, which means entertainment. I'll try to entertain you. I'll try to educate you as well, because entertainment without education would just be clowning around. My Twitter handle is @Mano Paul. So if you want to tweet about the talk, use that to tweet about the talk. And if you say something nice about me in the talk, I will retweet it. If you say something bad about me, then we have a personal problem. Your personal problem. No, I'll probably retweet that as well. So anyway, my primary identity is I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. After about 3 near-death calls, I kind of came to realization that the things we do in this world matters, and what we leave behind for our people, for our kids, for our community is what really matters. So I'm a Christian. We founded Hackformers, which is Hackers or Transformers for Christ, in 2000, about 3 years ago. And I actually see many of the Hackformers friends over here as well, Rich Grimes and others. So thank you for the support. We actually teach security, teach Christ, and teach security in Christ. We're based out of Austin, and there are other satellite chapters wanting to be interested to be spun off. I'm a husband of one. I've got to be careful when I say this because I speak very fast. And I'm a husband of one and a father of 2, because if I switch that around and I say I'm a husband of 2 and I'm a father of 1, my wife is going to kill me over here. And I love my wife, Sangeeta, and I've got 2 beautiful and wonderful boys, Ruben and Itai, 9-year-old and 3-year-old. And so I'm very thankful to God for the gifts that He's given us. So, and Ruben is actually a rap star. He just had his, Ruben, come on over here for a second. I got to do this because he just had his second time at Derbycon. He spoke a couple of hours ago, and he just got his 1,000th follower at Derbycon. So Derbycon, we love you. On Twitter. So what do I do for my day job? I actually work in information security training, primarily as the CEO of Securus Solutions. I've written a couple of books, 7 Qualities of Highly Secure Software. It's a good read for you if you're interested in kind of doing an anecdotal, allegorical kind of way of looking at secure software itself. Also the official guide to the Secure Software Lifecycle Professional, which is used for the certification exam with ISC Squared. So I wrote the first and the second edition of that book as well. And then before I came to the world of security, I used to deal with sharks. So I used to live in the Bimini Islands in the Bahamas, and I came into the world of security from the Bimini Islands, and that's a different story that we could talk about over beer or something, as to how I made that transition. So I was a shark biologist, and now I'm a security professional. I kind of look at it from the standpoint of there are sharks at sea, and then there are sharks on land. It's actually easier to identify the sharks at sea because anatomically and morphologically they're kind of similar for the most part. But the sharks on land, like the hackers that we have to deal with, it's kind of hard for us to, sometimes identify. So that is me in a nutshell. And then in terms of the training offerings, my company provides mostly around application security, building secure software, and kind of that's one of the things that I'll be looking at in the context of this talk as well. So we have from AppSec for managers and executives to building hacker resilient applications. I'm actually be running a 1-day class at HughesCon on October 14th. So if you're from the HughesCon Houston area, then you could actually see if you want to come for that, and check with Michael Farnham as well, who runs HughesCon. Right? So I actually want to start my talk with this quote, which if anyone's going to help us beef up our cyber defenses, it's going to be the hackers that know what it is like to play the offense. And it actually is, so when this comes from an article, when I searched for the article, why do we suck at cybersecurity? This was the second article that came. The first two were like Fed-related articles which said the U.S. government sucks, and I'm not even going to go into that part about cybersecurity. But the second article actually talked about, why is it that cybersecurity threats are going to get much, much more worse? And one of the observations that the author actually writes in that is that if you really want to get this upper hand as a defender, then you've got to learn to be able to go to the offenders. In fact, he says hug a hacker, right? Meaning to hire a hacker mindset. And so you need to be able to know what it is like to play the offense itself. So, show of hands. How many of you would deem yourself as hackers, or who are like, I see Larry up there, Hackers the Matrix, from Security Weekly and a few others, okay? All right. How many of you would deem yourself as defenders of a company? All right, now, okay, the rules of this whole exercise is you've got to raise your hands one way or the other. It's mutually exclusive. Okay, a few of you are like kind of confused, and both hands don't go up for both. So how many of you would say that you're defenders? Your primary responsibility is to protect your organizations or your companies. All right, good. How many of you defenders want to be hackers? Okay. How many of you hackers want to be defenders? Now, I didn't ask how many of you are married want to be single. That's a different... It's almost, but here's the thing though. So many of the times we look at it from a hacker standpoint and we don't want to be defenders because the hacker's role is really to be able to break stuff, right? And to be able to see how your systems are exploitable or not. However, a defender has got to play both sides of the chess game. And so it's important for us to look at it. Now, hacking, why is it that most of the hackers don't want to be defenders? Because we have in the media this whole kind of, approach and this attitude that hacking is sexy and defense is not. How many of you would agree with me on that? Show of hands. Right? Why is that? This cartoon actually best explains that, I think. This guy who's kind of was trying to mug this guy who's in the suit, and he comes with a knife for mugging him, and the other guy goes, oh, so this, and he pulls out his gun, and then his girlfriend or wife, pulls out his gun alongside him, and she goes, and then it's like, the guy who's actually the mugger comes and says, this is so embarrassing, that he kind of almost got mugged himself, and the lady kind of says, oh, like the papers will ever report, right? Self-defense. So that's the problem. Papers and the media actually reports hacking exploits and things that are successful from a breach standpoint. But if you actually did something good, when was the last time you said that this company did not get breached because they had such good defenses? Have you ever? No. Right? So that's kind of something that we got to go back and say. So going back to the question, hackers versus defenders, can you really stop playing catch up and win? Right? For this purpose of this talk, I take the stance of a defender. And my son and I, we both just tested about 3-4 weeks ago for our second degree black belt in Kung Fu. And one of the things that our Shifu and our senior master actually always tells us is this. When you want to fight, you always have to do two things in a spar. The first thing, clear your mind completely. Don't think about the spar, because the best fighter is a counter fighter. So you have your eye contact, you make sure you're positionally correct with your appropriate stance, you kind of read the other person, and then you counter fight. And so how many of you have taken like martial arts or something like, right? So you kind of know what I'm talking about, where you counter fight because you gain the advantage because you're actually trying to put the opponent in their place because they don't know what you're going to react or how you're going to react, right? So from your stance and your attack and your defenses as well. So I'm actually going to take that, and I love this quote by Bruce Lee, where he says the best fighter is not a boxer, not a karate man or a judo man. He's the one who's able to adapt to the situation. So a guy who's coming at you boxing, he's able to evade that attack by giving a strong kick. The one who's coming to you with a kick, he's able to evade that attack by throwing him off as a judo man. And the guy who's coming to you with a judo attack, you'll be able to box him out because he's close range fighting with you. So the one that you can fight. So in terms of why I'm saying this, my stand here is as a defender, but it is important for us to know, can we really win? Because the defenders by default have certain disadvantages. And most of you are going to relate to me. Those who actually raised your hands for being the defender in the defender profile are going to raise this. You're going to say that you're going to actually deal with this whole charade of compliance. Right? How many of you have to deal with Sarbanes-Oxley, or if you're financially trading, or the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, if you're in the financial industry? We have so many compliance. And if you notice, the word pain is in the word compliance. Right? The word lie is also in the word compliance. Often you find like you want to lie to your auditors, right, to get away from the situation. And so we have to always constantly kind of trying to get this. And then how many of you have been in a audit meeting where a compliance auditor was auditing the control evidence in your organization? Okay, now keep your hands up. of those who've been in that situation, have you seen the movie Snakes on a Plane? Now, I don't have anything against auditors. I really don't. But you often feel like that. You can't like jump out of the plane. You can leave your hands down. I know you guys have taken martial arts because you don't, unless you're told not to, you kind of follow instructions. But so that's kind of the situation where you can't jump out or you can't actually be in as well. So we have this challenge of having to constantly try to drive security for the reasons of compliance. But compliance is not security. If you do proper security, you would be compliant, but it's not the other way around. Then talking about functionality, when it comes down to actually building security versus functionality, functionality trumps security almost all the time, right? The business is ahead of the security, and there's nothing wrong with that game. And when I'm talking about Trump, I'm not talking about Donald Trump, right? Or politician, or possibly future president, right? I was actually saying, I actually enjoy the debates. Do you guys see the debates? It is entertainment. It's very nice. Right? And so security often gets kind of left behind on the sidelines. And then the other mistake that most organizations have made is with regard to security. In order to address software security and issues, what is the first charter of thing? They'll actually go and buy some tool. Right? Save money, go buy some tool. And so rather than investing appropriately in the people and in the talent pool, they go buy a tool. And a tool or a fool-centric approach, right, becomes a problem because people are the weakest link. Now, when I talk about people are the weakest link, why are they the weakest link? The weakest link because they implicitly trust. Right? And so in order for the defender to ever stop playing this catch-up game and to win, what are some of the things we can do? In other words, what I'm asking is, if hacking is sexy, can defense be sexier? Right? I asked around before I came into this talk, and I asked some of the other speakers and other folks as well, and I said, can the defender ever stop playing catch-up and win? Without batting an eyelid, they actually said no. I was like, that's not the premise of my talk, though. Because there's got to be something that is different. So can defense ever be sexier? And I'm actually encouraged to hear that some of you feel, yes, it can be, and it will be, and you'll see through the course of the talk as well. So the attitude that most we hear about is that the attacker has the advantage, the defender has the disadvantage. What are some of the reasons for that? One, they say that the attacker doesn't have to play by the rules of engagement, whereas the defender has to play by the rules of engagement, right? The attacker is seeking to enter into one entry point, whereas the defender has to guard every single entry point. The attacker can attack at will, at whatever choice and whenever they want to, and the defender has to be a vigilante 24/7, right? And 365 days a year. So if somebody asks you a question as a defender, how do you sleep at night? What should your answer be? You don't sleep well. Or I'll give you what you can actually do to get away from the situation. You say, I sleep like a baby. Every 2 hours I get up and cry. Right? That's the situation we are in. And so when it comes down to, right, so Michael Howard, a good friend of mine who wrote the Writing Secure Code book, he actually, from Microsoft, he actually kind of came up with this attacker's advantage was the defender's dilemma, and he had posted recently this thing about the attacker's advantage was the defender's dilemma, about this entry points and the vigilante aspect of it. And Mubix, who we all know from, the Metasploit Minute, Rob Fuller, he actually came back and he said, I don't like this attitude, I actually hate this attitude because it's a defeatist or it's a defeatist attitude. And then Michael responded back by saying that it's really not a defeated attitude. I'm not trying to actually say that it's a defeated attitude. It is a defeatist attitude. It's kind of a call for the defenders to be diligent and vigilant, right? And so I kind of agree with both of them. I agree with Rob as well as I agree with Michael in terms of what their analysis. But I actually agree even more with another friend of mine, Carl Sampson, right, who's from the, shout out to the Proverbs Hackers groups, if you guys are from the Proverbs Hackers job, right? And with Carl over there, he actually responded back saying, I don't think it's really about defeating or having a defeated attitude or not. It's really about a different mindset. It's just a difference of mindset. So what we really need to answer that question, can the defender ever stop playing catch up and win, is if the defender, has a different mindset. So people may be the weakest link, but they can be the strongest defense if, and only if, they're trained and educated about hacker types, hacker tools, and hacker techniques. Right? So we look at hacker types. What motivates a hacker? So why do hackers do what they do? Pizza? Somebody said pizza? Money? Okay. Financial gain? Somebody else? Sorry? Fame? Fun? Okay. Psychopath. All right. Actually, you guys are all right because you guys can do this talk. right? Because you actually covered everything that I kind of put into 3 or 4 C's. They want to be cool, they want to have cash, they have a cause, or it's reason for some country or something like that. And so we'll look at the hacker types. Hacker type, cool. And why is it important for us to know these? We'll see that in a minute. But from the hacker type itself, the one who needs to be cool, it's actually somebody who said fame, right, or ego. Because often hacking is directly attributed to intellect, right? And if you're a hacker, you must be really brainy, right? And failing to realize that common sense may not be very common. Right? So it's not that hackers, they have intellect, and I don't disagree with that at all. Now, but the driver primary is fun and fame. Somebody also mentioned fun. They just do it because they can. It's fun to do, right? It's easier to break stuff than to build stuff. How many of you go and try to put together Lego blocks without really having the instruction manual? Right? It's fun actually to build stuff without instruction, but we kind of try to build and conform to things. But how easy it is to break something that you built. It's very easy. You don't have to actually follow instructions. So they kind of do it for fun and fame mostly. The other one was, somebody mentioned financial gain, right? Or cash. Cash is the primary driver in this case. Where in terms of the cybercrime service economy, an article that was published in 2008 by the Harvard Business Review, actually at that point in time said it was $1.5 billion. This is 2008 we are talking about. The Norton cybercrime report in 2011 reported it was at $338 billion in the cybercrime economy. That is a huge money pot, right? That's a fantastic article. I would actually ask you to go read both of those because it's important for you to kind of know where it is. But financial gain essentially is the driver. The other type of hacker is the cost-based hacker, somebody who's trying to promote an agenda, a propaganda. They're trying to, deliver a message. They're doing something because it's really not fame or money. It's not really financial gain, but they want to deliver a message. They want to deliver it really strong and hard, right? So they could be internal. So an internal would be a disgruntled employee who's not very happy with the company, who may actually leave with a logic bomb in your system. So I asked once in a class that I was teaching, and I said, so how would you define a logic bomb? One of my students actually responded and answered, logic bomb is a going away present that the employee gives the employer. Right? Because they can do damage since they have access to the internal code set before they leave. So it could be an internal employee or it could be an external aspect in terms of hacktivism and active. It's important to recognize though, since they don't seek fame or finance really, they're actually seeking anonymity. And so fame is not the driver, so how do you actually control these against your organization? So it's important for us to look at. And the last one is, of course, the hacker type, which is a country-based or kind of from a military standpoint to have a military advantage. Now that actually is a pretty cool picture where it talks about Cold War nuclear analogy for today's cyber threat. And the question over there is, what will be the warrior guardian of the future look like? And there's a guy in the back with his laptop saying, yo dude, back here, right? That's kind of the picture we're dealing with, because somebody who controls the bits and bytes can actually turn on or turn off a nuke, right? Because they're all now connected and interconnected. So we kind of have to deal with, and these folks, you often rely on like APTs, like advanced persistent threats and stealthware, as opposed to just the things that bring them fame. Now, what is important to recognize is most of these stealthware and these APTs, if you go back and dissect it, you would find out that many of the time these attacks that they've been able to get into our organizations are with very common attacks. So that's the good news. So if we know as to how common attacks work, then we'll be able to protect against, even serious threats. So why is it important to understand hacker types? And understanding of your hacker threat profile helps defenders how to defend and protect against them. And kind of, if you look at the art of war or the art of cyber war in this case, knowing your enemy, right? Knowing your cyber enemy is equally important as knowing yourself and the controls that you can build into your systems and software. So that's hacker types. Now, with regard to hacker tools, they need to be educated as well. So what do hackers really use to hack? So we have kind of, if you look at most of the tools, you kind of use distros, Kali and others, exploit frameworks, Metasploit Beef, toolkits like the social engineering toolkits. You have custom scripts that they would write. They have their own tool bag in terms of what they would use. Now, what is happening is they use a set of weaponry to gain access into our systems and software to breach our organizations. But what are the tools that are there in the hands of the developers and the development staff? What if I told you that you don't bring a knife to a gunfight? So we want to defend, but we're really going with knives against gunfights, right? Now there are certain situations, right, in the case where I would tell you, if you take a knife to a gunfight, you're going to have a bad time. Unless you bring a gun to a knife fight and you stab them while they're laughing, which means you've got to be really fast and you've got to be first, right? Now, if that is, if you're not really fast or if you're not the first to attack, then you've got to make sure that you have a really big knife. You guys know what movie this is from? Crocodile Dundee, right? So that's not a knife. This is a knife. It's like you don't go take a box cutter to a knife fight also, right? What are you going to do? Like box them when they're trying to cut you, or cut them while they're trying to box you? That doesn't work. So you take the right tools for the job. By chance, if you do end up winning in this situation, you bring a knife to a gunfight and you leave with a new gun. But the important thing is that we take the right tools for the job. So can dev teams be given security tools? This is a problem that we often have to face, because you have to answer the question, like, can you really give your development teams that question? How many of you have had to come across that question and try to answer that, right? We've had that situation in our organizations. So can I really give my dev teams these tools? So what happens is, in most cases, they will say no. I actually say you need to equip your devs with security tools, taking into account a few things. The first and foremost, regulations of the land, right? Like in certain countries, you can't actually have security tools, even for like research purposes and things like that. So you need to take into account those regulations of the land, because the law of the land will trump everything else, even your corporate policy. Now, given that aside, if you actually have the ability to be able to allow your dev teams to be able to have some of the security tools that a hacker would use, then you should only do that if you have appropriate organizational maturity. The maturity aspects that come with proper software development, security processes, system development processes that need to be in place. Having appropriate processes, and you have that done in a controlled environment. So like when we go to train for our weapons that we use in our Kung Fu sparring classes, what we end up doing is we are asked to actually go to the Koon and test. We don't go to a bar fight to test how offensive and defensive we have, right? So you go to the appropriate place. We go to our school, our Koon, and that's where we test, because, it's padded and you make sure that you don't offend or hurt anybody as part of the training itself. But we learn both offense and defense in a very controlled environment. We need to do the same within our organizations as well. And of course, personnel maturity. You've got to know your people, your teams, to see if they're mature enough to be able to make sure when you give them scissors that they don't run with scissors in their hands, right? Now, what do kids do if you give them scissors and ask them not to run? So, right? So, because what happens is, if a fool with a tool is still a fool, and this is what you would have. Right? That's not the right tool for the job. So give them the appropriate tools. So we talked about hacker tools as well. Hacker techniques. So what do hackers do to actually hack, to hack? In other words, why are most applications vulnerable? So if you actually go back to the report, this was actually what report was this? This was the Verizon, the data breach information report, security report, the data breach report that Verizon published. If you notice, it actually says most of these hacks can be prevented. So it's that there's some breakdown somewhere, and that it also talks about how the top 4 attacks actually talked about humans as being the main reason as to why the attacks were even possible. Right? So an application's reasons for it to get hacked, the hackability reasons for an application, can basically be broken down into design issues, code issues, or people issues. Right? When we talk about design issues, how many of you threat model in your organization? All right? So you've done threat modeling. Let me ask you this question. In some cases where it's actually not even existent. In cases where it is existent, it's inadequate. Right? You don't go up to the level that you really need to. Now, will you ever have a perfect threat model? No, you cannot, right? And that's okay, but you at least start off. But often the problem in threat modeling exercise within companies is the fact that you do it as a one-time activity, and then it doesn't become a living document throughout the life cycle of that system or that software to get developed. And so what happens is we've done the threat model for the sake of threat modeling, it's checked off. So the best way to actually explain that is, if you have a treadmill at home, how many of you have a treadmill at home? How many of you use the treadmill at home? Yeah? So otherwise it ends up becoming just a threat model that's of no use, and you expect us to be fit if you don't use the treadmill at home. The same thing if you don't use the threat model throughout the life cycle, then you have. And of course, threat model will give you insight into logic flaws, right? Flaws that are not necessarily code-centric, but logical issues with the business itself. Now, why should you threat model? Guess what? Hackers threat model your application too, and you know what you're going to try to protect, right? What your entry and your exit points are. So threat modeling from a design standpoint. Now, with the code standpoint as well, we have some issues. If you look at this graph, it kind of comes, the threat vectors for criminals, the common coding errors from 2015 as was published, it kind of comes out to say that most of it is actually your overflow attacks, your input validation, things that we can actually go back and look. Now, if I say this, we kind of hear about this in threat reports. We hear about it when we go through in, when a breach is announced or something. But the question is, it's not important as much to know of the attack as to know as it is to know why the attack was even possible. Now, many of the times when I go and talk with dev teams and in companies, when I ask them about, you heard about SQL injection? They all say yes. You heard about buffer overflows? They all say yes. Do you know really what happens in SQL injection? And then you get this blank stare, right? Like, what really happened? What is happening in a buffer? We have heard about buffer overflows from the time that, computing started, I guess, right? But what really happens in a buffer overflow? So I think the best thing is to actually demonstrate one to show, because many people, even in the hacking community, have heard about buffer overflows, but not seen really what happens under the covers. They've heard about SQL injection and not really seen what happens. So I'll see if I can get through a couple of demos here, and I think I'm doing okay on time. So the first demo is a buffer overflow attack. And in order for buffer overflow to work, there is actually a technique in new operating systems called address space layout randomization. And essentially what it is every time the program runs on the system, it randomizes the address space. It's from Windows, in Windows, I believe 2007 and later, they have it by default. And then kernel space 2.6. 6 in Linux, I think they have it turned on by default as well. You can kind of actually go and see where it is. You can go in Linux, you can go to the kernel and see if it is turned on. And if it's 2, which is the default, it's turned on. So you really want to turn that off. And I'm doing this for the purpose of the demo. But I also found out that it really, even if I leave it at 2, it still actually does an overflow when I put it into debug mode to see it. So echo 1 into that, and then when I cat that out, so now I have 0 on that. So I kind of turned off ASLR. And now in this I have a very simple C script, which is all it does is actually includes a few standard I/O headers. Actually, in order for me to print it, I have a call to the string function, the header files, and then I'm going to do, and it's a main function, take some arguments in. I've created a buffer, which is about 48 in size. Do a mem copy into the buffer, whatever arguments are passed in, and then the string length of that for the size of the buffer. So I'm basically reading an entire string that is put into that buffer itself, and I'm just going to print out the buffer. So essentially, that's all that does, a very simple function. And so we'll compile this into an output, and I'll just call it buffer overflow demo. And so I have the buffer overflow demo, and if I now send it anything, it's going to copy into that buffer if it's lesser than the size of the buffer, and then it's going to print it out. So let's say hello Derbycon 5.0, and it just basically printed out hello Derbycon 5.0. Now what happens is if I do the same thing, but instead of sending in hello Derbycon 5.0, I send it, let's say, it just prints out Vin Diesel's movie, or actually, was it Vin Diesel? Right? XXX, you guys were thinking about something else, weren't you? So, all right, but I could actually do that also in terms of the script itself. So I could do that in terms of script with regard to passing in. Let me see if I can get this to. So what I'm actually printing out is when I write a Python command. It's going to be hard to see. Python command print number A, and let's do that 3 times. And it printed A 3 times. Now if I go back and actually print that 40 times, it printed A 40 times. Now the size of the buffer was 48. So if I go print, instead of doing 40, I do actually, let's say 400, I get a segmentation fault. Now at that point I know something's gone wrong, but I still don't know what it is. So I've got to go look at it from seeing if I can actually make it overflow, and I go more than what I think it's actually more than their segmentation fault point to about 4,000 times, just print that character, and I get the AAA kind of printed out, whereas I also get a segmentation fault right there. So what happened is there's something that's gone wrong. So let's put this into actually a debug mode. And it loads basically the symbols in. So I'm in debug mode, and what I can now do is interact and run this program and see what is happening inside in the registers. So I go and do the same function. We did 4,000. Oh, actually, before I run the program, I need to show you something. Let me disassemble the main, because I have to put breakpoints in there. So when I disassemble the main, you would notice that the memcopy function is instruction set 58 from the start of the program. So I've got to go put a break there at the main plus 58, because I want to see what the values are in the register before the buffer is actually written into. So I've got one breakpoint there, but I also want to be able to, before it actually returns and quits the program, I want to see the values in the register. So I'm going to do another breakpoint at 80, which is before it leaves the program. So do a break. And so I've got 2 breakpoints right now. And so when I run this program, it's got a break at those breakpoints. And it reached breakpoint 1. Now looking interactively into the registers, you notice that the return base pointer and the stack pointer, they have an address space, which is a valid address space, because the function to copy in hasn't taken place. This is the breakpoint before the memcopy actually took place. So you have D2, D0, and D290 for the base pointer and the stack pointer. Now if you go back and let's continue the program, so I wanted to copy in. It hit breakpoint 2, but let's go back and see the registers. Has it actually done anything at all? It still keeps that because it hasn't yet done the overwritten part, and we haven't seen the word segmentation fault yet. So I've got to single step through this program. All right? And so I'm single stepping into the program to see what's now taking place. Now the buffer is getting, whatever I passed in is now getting written into the buffer. So by interactively looking at it, the base pointer is no longer the D2, D0, because internally what has happened is the value that I passed in has overwritten the address space, which is hex 41. ASCII for A is hex 40 is 41, and then the hex value is 414141, a couple of strings of those. So we actually overwrote the address pointer. So an attacker knows that if you don't do proper input validation, don't do proper string length checks before you copy into the buffer, you actually see they can actually overwrite it and then point it to an address space that they have their malicious code, their rootkit or shell code, or the payload itself. So when you kind of go under the covers and see what's happening, you kind of see what's really taking place in terms of the attacker being able to gain advantage of your system because of improper checks, right? Now, of course, you have safe APIs and things like that that you should be using in your code, so you don't have this, and you can also rely sometimes on the ASLR itself, or the data execution prevention, or the execution stack protection, that's in the OS itself. So that's one part of the attack to demonstrate. The other one I want to actually demonstrate is from Windows, and we've heard about SQL injection, and I did, so I have a website here. I'm actually going to this is a website I'm building with my son to help him learn about security, and then I thought I would kind of show this. We're kind of working on some of these attacks, and so what happens really behind the covers of an injection attack itself? So you have an application, and you're going to try to sign in. Anybody want to give me your username and password for? No way? Come on, you guys can trust me. Huh? Who do you want to try? Let's try Donald Trump. What do you think his password is? What? Win, win, win? You've been fired. All right, so we'll just go with some. I'm going to just type in a password and see. User does not exist. So kind of basic things in terms of, an input form. This could be a bank application. It could be an application you're developing internally for users to log in. So in terms of testing for an injection attack, one of the common things we do is we check to see if it is injectable to N apostrophe or 1 equal to 1 attack, and I'll kind of explain as to why that actually even takes place. So you sign in, and it did bypass authentication, and it gave me Bruce Wayne's account. All right? So just do the or 1 equal to 1, and it went through. Now, as a hacker, you're kind of looking at it, or you're going to be like, okay, if that is injection prone, let me see what else I can do with this. And somebody who's kind of a little bit adept with regard to querying, like building queries, can go back and say, I could try having 1 equal to 1 attack. Check. And essentially the user now, the application gives back an error, and it tells you that the user ID is invalid, right? Because it's not there in a group by clause. That's the yellow screen of death, absolutely, with .NET Framework, right? If you don't handle it directly, then you're going to see this. So you now see actually an yellow screen of death, and you actually still see this in many applications where it dumps out the error log, right? So improper error handling in place. So now I see this. Now it tells me, though, it's very kind to tell me that you didn't group by the user ID. So if I go and do a group by user ID, and I sign in, it tells you, you're pretty smart in grouping by user ID, but you're pretty dumb when it comes to user login. Right? So you didn't actually group by user login. So I then go and actually group by user ID, and let's group by user login as well. We didn't group by user password, right? So we could keep doing this till we actually go through. What we're really doing is that a hacker is kind of enumerating through your database to get all the columns out of the database. So he's kind of coming in, and so for purpose of time, he's going to group by user ID. You guys can see this? Not really. Make it a little bit bigger and see. Is that better? All right. So you group by user login, user password, username, date created, whatever the columns are as you go through and enumerate. Now, I've done this already before, so I'm going to just copy that, and let's paste it in here. Now, when I pasted it in here, it said having, and it's not actually letting me paste anymore because the developer has put in some max length control, right? But we got to go back and check to see if there's any way we can remove it. And there are web developer plugins that you could use where you can click on the plugin and you can say remove all max length. And basically said I removed the maximum length. So it's on the handle on the browser side. You basically removed the plugin, and now I can go back in and type in having 1 equal to 1. And I sign in. Now nothing really happened because it didn't error since we actually have gone through all the user columns in the database itself. So what really happened is as we're going through this, you kind of, hackers looking at your internal system just by looking at error messages and kind of seeing what's happening behind the covers. And I'll get to the whole part about why was this even possible. But before we even get to that, what else can a hacker really do with this? Rather than actually looking at just the names of the column, he could actually go back now and just do a drop table users. Then the demo won't continue, right? Because it'll be a denial of service. But that could be dangerous if you have an injection-prone application that can drop table accounts or users or customers or sales, right? So what ends up happening then is a hacker would basically go back and say, I'm really not interested in just knowing about the database, but I want to see the data behind it. So he'll try to select the user login from the user table, right? And see what the data type is. Or if I select all columns from the user and try that the username is greater than A, hoping that the first user recorded there is A or sorted by A, and an administrator or so, they'll try to see if they can find that information. So just going and getting select user login. And the reason we do a union is to make sure that it fails because it won't have another record set that it can union with. So we want to see that error. And then if you take a user login, what data type do you think is a user login? Like a numeric data type or a string or a varchar, like a varchar or an nvarchar. If you do a mathematical operation on a numeric data type, you're going to see this impact or this effect that it was unable to convert nvarchar data type, and the data type was bwayne, right? So now you actually have the user login bwayne. Right? And so if you go back and then see what would be the next thing that you would think he would do. Get me the user password for the user login, where the user login is bwayne. And that went through because I think I should force it. Lex is no Rex, right? It should really be Joker is no joke, I think, right? So So Bruce Wayne's account, right? So, but then the hacker really wouldn't go through and kind of look through each one. He or she would most likely do something where they'll declare a temporary table, and then I'll have to word wrap this so you can see the script. They'll declare a temporary table, select accounts and passwords, and then accounts and passwords into the temporary table, and basically do a recursive loop, and then you'll be able to see all the different usernames and passwords for that user table itself. But why did this really take place, or why did this happen? So if you go back to our presentation, buffer overflow, hey, stack overflow, right? It basically overflowed the buffer itself, so it could not handle it and we had an issue. Injection anatomy. The query in the code was really to build a query dynamically taking user input. And we see this where when they were expecting something, the hacker inputs 1 equal to or 1 equal to 1, double dash, and that basically changes and puts that into the text username field, and it comes out where the query becomes select star from user, where username is nobody, like just a empty string, or 1 is equal to 1. And then anything after the double dash gets ignored by T-SQL. So what happens is you basically got back to a condition where it came back as true. So where is 1 equal to 1? Is 1 equal to 1? Always true, right? So in that situation, we kind of come back to a valid query that was injected in by supplying a user data type, user data, as if it was just data, but the backend interpreter interpreted it as a command itself. So you may be asking, what about code review then? Why is it that as defenders we do code review? We actually have gone through this process and we say we've done code review, and yet our applications are, injectable or prone to attacks. So what's the problem with code reviews? So how many of you have to how many of you when you go to a code review have realized the fact that you're reviewing the code, not the coder? Right? But when you go to a code review, often coders kind of take it very personal in terms of it's my baby. Right? So they kind of take instead of taking an open mind to fix the code for issues, they kind of take a very defensive stand. And code review often becomes kind of instead of it being an integral process, it kind of is an add-on activity in many organizations. And so we've got to go back and make sure that it's, integral to the part of the whole software development process itself, or the system development process. Manual inspection of code. In most companies, if you go back and actually do an audit of their software development lifecycle processes, and they'll say, we do a code review, and you ask them, can you show me evidence of it? What you would really get is kind of a tool run check, right? We ran this tool for static analysis or so, and we got this checklist of things. Most of the times, those things don't get really fully fixed before they go into production. So we are going back to that thing, but we're going to constantly keep playing catch up. So there are issues with that, and we don't handle all the inputs or the findings itself. So why do you need to do code review? Guess what? Hackers review your code too, because they'll find it as juicy as you would, right? If you have to protect against it. So the last one, of course, is people issues. The defender profile. Now, what in my experience of over a decade in the information security and software development world has been is this. We've often taken security-savvy, security-prone people and tried to put them into a developer mindset, right, to be able to protect our systems and software in the world we live in. It's two different profiles, because developers are intended to build things, security folks are to break things. So, but what I found is to hire a good security professional into a dev team or as a defender, it's better to actually go to the development staff and bring them in and train them in security, because they know how to build stuff already. So it's easy for them to learn how to break stuff, right? So it's something to keep in mind as you go back and look at what are some of the things besides command skills and communication abilities. It's also important for them to know content and content knowledge in terms of programming and in terms of the software world that we live in, because it's always very easier to hack the human, right? So here's an example. So you'd see Twitter, you basically go back and you put your Twitter login and this one without really many times failing to recognize that it's a spoofed or a cloned website, right? Just by looking at it, because we get so attuned to the world system that we are in, we don't see the other peripherals, and so we often get caught with applications getting hacked because they are in the blind spots, right? And hacking the human. Whatever you do, don't be like this, and with this I will conclude. It's actually a video. I didn't put sound on this. Do I need to plug something in here for the sound? Is this good? Yeah? people do dumb things. Right? So whatever you do, don't be like this. And I'm saying that because when my son first saw that video, he's like, that lion should not even eat that gazelle because it's so dumb. Right? So don't become like easy prey for hackers. So again, to kind of summarize, right? If you're really going to be able to, if anyone is going to be able to help us to beef our cyber defenses as a defender, it's going to be the hackers, right? And so in this case, really the defenders that know what it is like to play offenses. So you need to know the internal anatomy of what attacks take place, what really is happening under the cover, so that you can go and put the appropriate control sets. So defenders for the win, right? So understand hacker types, hacker motivations, the hacker tools that they actually use, so that you actually don't end up taking a knife to a gunfight kind of situation. Do hacker techniques like the hacker would, threat model like the hacker would actually threat model your applications and system, code review like the hacker would code review your applications and systems, and be trained and educated to think and act like a hacker, because a proactive offense is really your best defense. Right? So with that said, I'm getting the 4-minute time check. So if you like this presentation or you did not like this presentation, you need an encore presentation for your company, have security program development, consulting needs, or if you have any training awareness needs, then contact me. My email is mano@securerisksolutions.com, and I'm on Twitter @Mano Paul. Otherwise, have a blessed day, and thank you. Stop playing catch up and win. That's the defender with a hacker mindset. So thank you very much. Are we good?